Hello everyone and welcome back to the Slow Car Salon. This is the moment you've all been waiting for, when engine and vehicle come together in holy matrimony so that may go faster and do skids and all that other fun stuff that y'all kids like doing apparently. I mean, I'm a young kid, so I like doing that too. Well anyways, the whole scope of this next episode you're about to see is getting this engine in the hole, as well as a few other things that come along right after that. So, come along and let's get started. So as you saw in the last episode, we attached a transmission to the engine, installed the clutch and flywheel, new rear main seal, pilot bearing, all that good stuff. Now to facilitate installing this engine into the car, as you know, I resprayed the engine bay and re-cleared it and all that good stuff, so it's shiny and awesome, and I would hate to have that thing scratched up. So one thing I need to make sure to do is cover all of the sensitive areas in cardboard, or even put cardboard over the engine and transmission as it knocks around as we try to get this thing in there. I've also removed the cross member in order to give myself a little bit more room because of how wide that piece is. And that's pretty much it. I may remove accessories like the AC compressor and the alternator later on, but I think we'll just give it a shot as is for right now. The other thing I have to do to give myself a little bit more clearance is to remove the radiator, which should be no trouble at all. And then we can slot this thing in there. Well, there you go. The motor is finally in. Turned out to be a whole family affair, and funny enough, so thanks to my parents for that. However, yeah, it went in as smoothly as it could possibly have gone. Only suffered a little bit of collateral damage, scuffing of the valve covers, and a little bit of scratching on the firewall back here by this end of this cam. But honestly, if that's all that happened, then that's not bad, and my painted engine bay is in awesome shape. But yeah, this fit up just fine. With the motor mounts, they ended up working pretty well too. I am just on the extent of the mount there. I'm using only one bolt on the poly mount, but I think that should be okay. Same goes on the other side down here, like so. Got to slip it through the master cylinder and stuff. But there it is. It is mounted up on the poly mounts, nice and tight. And the transmission is bolted up in the standard location under the car with the cross member right here. It is slid all the way back though, just as a little in terms of the adjustability and the range in which it can be, you know, mounted up. So it's all the way back, and that's fine. It's all mounted in, torqued up, and the shifter position is also spot on as well, like so. So could have asked for a more perfect install. Went in very smoothly. I would definitely recommend, despite the severe angle you need to get the engine and transmission in at, I would recommend definitely making sure the engine and transmission are together. But there it is, guys. That is, with the glorious sunset now shining down on the car, there we have it. The heavenly matrimony of V8 and Celica, like it was meant to be. And the best part, even as far as the engine and bell housing and everything is concerned, no bashing with a hammer was required. It all fit up just fine. Even the clutch line could be routed up, and I had plenty of room in order to do that. Clutch line's coming up from here and through here. And then I think the bleeder line is down here as well. It just has to go down. I got to mount it so I can access it from underneath the car somehow. But there it is. Another thing I just noticed right now is the radiator support got dented a little bit here, and the mount's not lining up here either, because of how the engine sort of basically, it just kind of slid over the top of the radiator support, unfortunately. It was really tight, but that I should be able to kind of bang or bash back out with like a punch or something like that, or block of wood, at least somewhat, to get it back into the right shape, because you can definitely see it's a little flatter here, and then it dips down and kind of warps right around like from here to here in this area. So that's something to fix. I was just trying to check how the radiator was going to mock up, and I also don't have a lot of clearance there because of how this sits basically right here. I somehow need to tuck the radiator underneath the radiator support. That is to come. Coming back under the car, I've reattached the drive shaft. Because I didn't line it up when I was putting the engine and transmission in, what I had to do was just drop the center support here, and then that allowed me to drop it out and then slide the drive shaft in at the yoke inside the back of the transmission, and then put the whole thing back up and then just do up 2 bolts. But everything driveline wise is also now lined up nicely. So that's another relief. Figured I'd just take a look under here to get an idea of cross member clearance, which looks really awesome, and steering rack clearance, which also looks really awesome. So wow, yeah, it's like this engine was meant to be in here. Of course, if you use an LS400 front sump engine, then this is how you're going to make it fit. If you get an engine from an SC400, then you got to get this whole front sump set up anyways. But yeah, I think this is the best way to go because there's just, yeah, it's just a drop-in, awesome, direct fit, sitting on the mounts nicely. Oh, look at that. All right, it's another day. The excitement after having put the engine in has died down, so it's finally time to get back and start sorting things out. And the first thing I'm going to start with is repairing my radiator support because that got dented in, and as you can see, there's a pretty significant dip right there, and that's just preventing the radiator from bolting up properly. So I'm going to start with that. And then I'm going to start by putting in the sway bar brackets and the front tension rod brackets and attempt to fit up this RA64 white line front sway bar. Now, I had a few concerns about the end links and the fact that the RA64 bar is about an inch narrower than a Celica bar. But the end link design from the white line sway bar is reversible, like the little shackle that actually bolts up to the sway bar can go on either side, so I think that may be our saving grace. Anyways, that's enough talk. Let's try to get this thing in. Okay, reforming that thin sheet metal, it turned out to be much easier than I thought. I ended up using the end of an old jack handle, which left a little bit of an imprint. Ideally, I would have liked to use something that was a lot smaller than that, but that's all I had on hand. And wood is not hard enough of material to really make a dent in this, figuratively speaking, of course. Now, I was able to bolt up the radiator. I've just noticed after doing so that there's quite a bit of room still between where the radiator support opening area is and where like the condenser is. And I can also possibly get the radiator down a little lower and try to modify those bottom brackets because with the radiator in, there's just so little room in there. And even trying to slip in one of my low profile 9-inch Spall fans, it's just like that's no clearance at all. At least it does clear, but when it comes to the idler pulley here, it's just, yeah, that's touching. So I'd like to see if I could just tuck the radiator a little closer to the radiator support at some point. That way, at least, I definitely will have to offset the fans. Like one will have to be down in the bottom corner for the right side, and one's gonna be more up at the top for the left side. But I would definitely like to try to get some more room in that area. Okay, now it's time for the front sway bar. Okay, the front sway bar is in, and what a fit! It clears the 1UZ oil pan, no problem, because it has this little check across the front, which is really nice. Bolts right in, and White Line has their own bushings right here for the chassis mount, which yeah, I was able to use the energy suspension brackets that I had from before because I also previously had polyurethane bushings in this location. Comes down and under and bolts up to the control arm like no problem. And like I said, yeah, these bushings and like the way the shackles work here, you can sort of orient them in different ways, as I was able to put it on the outside of the sway bar versus where the instructions tell you to put it on the inside, assuming that the A86 chassis or the mounting points on the control arms are a little bit narrower. So this allows you to bolt it right up without having to heat or bend the sway bar, unlike other A86 sway bars which have been used and adapted for this application. So that's really nice. Got a decent bit of clearance here from the oil pan. The only concern clearance-wise that I have is right around this area where they have this little chassis rail right here. And when the suspension compresses, I'm concerned about it contacting there. So if that is the case, I'll have to probably cut some metal. But no worries until later on, because that'll be for when I drop the car. Next up, I want to take a look at some things here on the firewall, starting off with the heater valve as well as all of the heater core lines back here. Now, we have to make a significant number of connections from engine to heater core to valve and all that good stuff, but it's actually going to be relatively simple. How it's going to work is we have this first upper line coming out of the firewall. That's meant to go into this steel pipe here, which runs all along and underneath the intake manifold and into the back of the water pump. And so we're going to have to make some kind of a loop here. I'm not sure how exactly I'm going to execute that yet, but that's going to be the first challenge. The other two are going to be pretty simple. The next one, the lower line down here, has one straight line, as I'm also not going to be using the original heater core hardline pipes because I have enough access back here where I can put in a rubber hose instead. So yeah, that bottom fitting here out of the heater core, that's just going to come out all along and go into the bottom of the heater valve up here. And then from the other side of the heater valve, that line is going to go into this fitting coming out of the water crossover pipe here at the back of the heads. And that'll also be a pretty straight shot, although I'll have a 90-degree angle pipe that'll go in there. That looks a little something like this. And that's pretty much a straight shot from here to there. Like I said, the main challenge is just going to be getting basically a 270-degree loop from here all the way up and around and then on top to the steel pipe. But I'll see if there's any kind of at least 180-degree bypass hoses that are of a 5/8 inch inner diameter, because then I also have this little 5/8 inch right angle piece to make that extra little bend with a straight pipe. I don't know how reliable these plastic fittings are, but hopefully they'll suit my application so I don't have to get anything too crazy custom. I guess while I'm putting stuff on back here, I can also reattach the cruise control bracket, because that will also carry the hard lines. That one of them is mainly going to be for the brake booster, and that'll go down and around and back down into the brake booster fitting down here. So let's get a move on with that. Okay, that seemed to work out pretty smoothly. Got all of my heater hose connections made. Had to add a little bit of this loom material just because it does touch the engine hook right there. But that's okay. This will help prevent abrasion. And then ran the one long line all the way down up underneath the engine and cam cap here and into the heater. That all worked out really well. Eventually I'll figure out my solution to this heater hose here. It might end up being just some long run that makes that eventual 270-degree direction. That's all right. Then the cruise control bracket and the brake booster hardline all fit up just fine. Was able to use the original brake booster hose as a result of that. Ended up with this extraneous vacuum line, which maybe I'll use that to plug into the cruise control module and then run the feed that comes from the front of the intake manifold to that. So that'll be worked out later. And then as far as the brake booster feed from the back of the manifold, all I had to do is just cut a little bit off of the original hose here, and then it was able to just stretch right over, slip on. It's the same size as stock, so that worked out very, very well. All right, and now coming back to the radiator here. Since I've now mounted up the sway bar, and we have these bigger sway bar mount brackets now sort of in the way, I realized that the clearance down here between the lower radiator feed and that bracket is super close. So it's important that we get to tucking the radiator even closer underneath the radiator support here. That way that water outlet can point upwards a little bit more and clearance itself a little bit further away from that sway bar bracket. What I think I'm going to do to avoid too much cutting and fabrication is just in the way this is kind of mounting up here. I think I should be able to get away with bending away these tabs here that have these captive nuts inside of them. There's 4 of them all along the radiator support. I think what I'm going to try to do is bend them up and out of the way, and that should still allow me to use my custom brackets that I've made to mount it up at the top. I can probably still make new brackets and tie them into these holes somehow later on, but I think that should be the way to do it for now so I can still use my existing brackets. Okay, now first I want to get off to talking about these top mounts here. These are definitely not my final execution for this kind of bracket. These are very Mickey Mouse, and I'm not going to leave this permanently. I only wanted to do this so I could bring the radiator as far close to the radiator support here as possible, give myself just as much clearance as I need. Clearance here for the radiator water outlet is still pretty tight, but in general this radiator is a pretty tight fit already, despite bending all the tabs along the radiator support here. But it works out for the most part. I can fit my fans in here. I'll definitely have to see about how the lower radiator hose is going to fit. Probably will just do it anyway, but it'll end up being a fairly tight fit, I imagine. So anyway, now that I've removed the radiator in a snap, next I want to take a look at this harness that's supposed to run just underneath and along the radiator support here, because I guess just over the years it's been abraded away by its clearance or lack thereof to the radiator. So I just want to go in there and quickly re-loom that, and also make sure, because on this side there's quite a lot of wear here, and I'm assuming that's because there was too much overhang and it wasn't really staying nicely inside this little groove right here, which I'm assuming is where the wire is supposed to pass by. So I'll make sure that that's clearanced properly and tucked and pulled, and get this new loom on, and then we can move on from there. Well, as it turns out, I need a slightly thicker wire loom because the one I have only goes up to 1/2 inch, and this bundle is about 5/8 inch in diameter. So I'll have to wait in order to finish this job here, but that's okay, because in the meanwhile, I can start to route up my fuel lines, particularly for the fuel inlet and fuel return to the fuel rails. Okay, got my fuel lines all mocked up in here and connected, and ran them along the back. They were all the right length, and it worked out really well. I then tried to put on the throttle body assembly here just to see how things would fit up, and I did run into a small clearance issue here with the throttle position sensor and this fitting off of the fuel pressure regulator. Now, there's also a little coolant hardline back there that it's interfering with. I could potentially put a straight fitting on the end of the banjo here, but I think it's just a little too large. The length is not there. The width is too big. So I don't think this is going to be ideal to put AN fittings here. So I could instead just come back to using the stock hardline piece, but then I would then have to cut the end of it, or at least some part of the end here, so then I can put a straight pipe to AN fitting, so at least I have some line that can now serve as the return, because otherwise this is then meant to go across to the left-hand side of the car, but then my return is on the right side. Another little thing to deal with, unfortunately, when it comes to all this custom stuff, but I guess that's what happens when you go custom. Also, gotta say, this Milwaukee tool has been by far the most useful thing I have ever bought. Tools are always an investment, and hell, if I were to make a list of top 10 tools to buy for working on cars, it'd be one of these. I'll put a link in the description where you can get it. Just this little 3/8 inch power ratchet. It's super, super convenient and easy to use. All right, I got some parts in. It's been a few days. Got all the fuel fittings I need to make the change for the fuel return line. Got some wire loom so I can do my front harness across behind the radiator here. And the heater line needed to make that last little connection back there. So now that this is all here, we can try to wrap up what I started before. So let's get to work. All right, that was a good little work montage. Let's go over what I did. So to start, I've added new loom to that front harness that runs across and underneath where the radiator support panel is here. As far as the fuel lines, I added some hose separators to clean everything up. I also ended up shortening this hose because in order to clear the throttle body, I took the original fuel return pipe and I just cut it here and added a 5/16 inch pipe compression fitting that has a -6 AN at the end of it, and used this like 150 or so degree adapter and connected that to the line. It runs all the way down to the fuel return pipe down there. Similar execution to how I converted the hard line down there to the braided line here. And yeah, this seems to work just fine. Has plenty of clearance for everything, even the brake booster hose here. So that worked out very nicely. And of course, the last of the heater hoses went in. Turns out just a straight section that, because they come kind of curled up in a kind of circle formation. So just following that curvature, I was able to just make a nice little loop going from the heater hose points behind on the firewall, kind of come up and around and then down into that steel pipe behind the coolant crossover, and it fit up just fine. I know I'm missing a hose clamp down there, but don't worry, I won't forget about that. Now, I had some concerns about the fuel pulsation dampener here and how it attached via this banjo and whatnot. And let me show you what I'm talking about. So here's the Vibrant M12 banjo bolt that I got originally, and here's the fuel pulsation dampener. While it does technically fit over the fuel pulsation dampener, because of the way the fuel pulsation dampener works, there's got to be a volume of fuel that has to travel up and into the top of the body of this thing. And looking at the original banjo on the fuel pipe from the LS400, you could see that, yes, while one side does match as far as the inner diameter and kind of the way it's supposed to fit onto the fuel pulsation dampener. See, this is the side that actually goes on the fuel rail, while the other side has an increase in diameter because it allows an opening for that fuel to go into that part of the body. And yeah, although this has a volume inside of the banjo, it's just not wide enough, nor do I have enough meat to kind of replicate this larger diameter up here, this slight increase. So what I ended up getting was this banjo from K-Tuned, just whatever Honda fuel banjo with the -6 AN at the end of it that they have. And this has a little bit more meat on the body of it compared to the Vibrant Performance piece. And that will allow me to actually, what I'll do is I'll take it onto the drill press and drill it out to match the diameter of the stock fuel pipe so that it will work properly with the fuel pulsation dampener. Because, yeah, as we flip it over, yes, it still fits, but at least we still have significant amount more material around here so that we can easily mimic the thickness required in order to clear the openings here in the body. So you should get a drill press, drill bit of the correct size, and I think I'm just going to ream this out a little bit so it matches the stock piece. Unfortunately, my set of Harbor Freight drill bits just doesn't go large enough, and my 1 5/8 inch drill bit that I have here is also too large. So let's find out what the size of this thing is. .34 millimeters, or let's see, what's that in inches? 9/16. All right, well, unfortunately, this drill bit set only goes up to 1/2, so I'll have to go out and get a 9/16 inch drill bit. All right, I went and got my drill bit. It's a 9/16, or as shown on the caliper, about 14.3 millimeters. Now, as far as the depth at which I'm going to have to drill this out, I mean, it has a very small lip there at the bottom of the original fuel banjo there. So I don't know, I might just go to the same lip on the K-tune fitting here at the bottom of that. So I think that should work out okay. Okay, not too bad. I guess now looking at how much material was actually removed here, I guess it doesn't really matter whether or not you use the K-tuned one or the vibrant one, because it just seems to remove a little bit of that lip that would normally seal either side. But since you're only retaining one of them, it still works just fine. And if we put on the seals onto the fuel pressure dampener here, still works just fine. And seems to have the opening large enough for the fuel to flow in there, so that's just fine. Now, of course, I wouldn't recommend holding the fitting into the drill press with your hands like I did, but what I would recommend is making sure you oil the drill bit and also blowing out the part with compressed air to remove any shavings also after deburring. Now let's fit this on the car. All right, so the fuel banjos are all in, fits all very nicely. I put new sealing washers in between the banjo and the fuel pulsation dampener there. Same goes on the other side over here with the fuel return fitting, which all fits up very nicely. And don't worry, I did not forget to put the hose clamp back there for the heater pipe from earlier. And now it's time to get back to that radiator. So I popped the radiator back in. Off camera, I made a couple of brackets now to replace those Mickey Mouse straps I was using earlier, using my previous vibration isolating mounts as usual. And how this is going to work is this plonks on right here, and we'll use this riv nut attachment that I've made here. And because of the length, it'll pull the radiator nicely up just about as far as it can go before it starts hitting stuff. But to ensure that it doesn't rub through the end tanks of the radiator, I have these little pieces of EPDM foam rubber strips that you can get from McMaster. These are 1/16 inch thick. I'm just going to place a couple along the sides just to make sure that we have no abrasion whatsoever. On the back of these brackets, I have about 3.5 millimeters worth of washers stacked up so that it at least sits above the level of the radiator support so it doesn't scratch anything. And that's pretty much it there. And I'll have that secured nicely with a couple of stainless hex bolts. These are M6. They should work very nicely for this application. Let's get it installed. And that fits up super nicely. And I gotta say that EPDM foam rubber strip keeps everything nice and unabraded, which is really cool. Keeps everything as basically as tight as I can get it back there, especially when considering that we have to route this harness up and through. So that's really nice. But I actually gotta take that radiator back out again so we can finalize the fan mounting. And what I'm going to do is I'm just gonna take each fan, stick them down here, kind of mark roughly with a Sharpie where it's going to go. And then what I'm going to have over here are some strips of very thin 1/16 inch thick, 1/2 inch wide aluminum. Just got this from the hardware store. And I'm going to use these and rivet them across the length of the radiator in order to provide a little bit better of a mounting plane for those fans. So that way the fans, because there are going to be actually 3 of them in the end, they don't sag and end up damaging the fins. All right, and there's the radiator fans all mounted up. How I ended up doing this was, yeah, with the 1/2 inch bar, I got these 5/32 inch rivets here and riveted it along this edge right here. Thankfully, nothing to pierce through other than just metal, and ran 4 of those across, and then used those as my mounting points for the fans. Now, I used a couple of these derail mounting kits, derail 13001 Instamount kits, and while they do work very well, the only issue I had is a couple of them broke because I forgot to add these little foam pads to the back. So what I ended up doing for where those broke is made this little contraption of zip ties with a washer, ran it through all the way to the other side, and made a little knot out of a larger zip tie and a washer, and that prevents it from being pulled through. And I mean, hey, it works. So I mean, it's also the bottom mount, so it's not as crucial to hold it towards the radiator as the top mounts are, but it'll just prevent it from flapping around. So this is good enough. And then all the rest, yeah, like I said, have these little foam pads that go behind the larger washers, and everything is nicely secured here now. Now, I know some of you may look at this and go, well, you just put 4 1/2 inch pieces of aluminum in front of the radiator here, so you're effectively blocking about 2 inches across the entire thing. What's up with that? Well, I am confident that these Spall fans, as they do have quite a high CFM rating, so I'm not worried about them being unable to pull air through this radiator, because the front is unobscured anyways, so who knows? We'll see how these do. This is the tried and true setup from some other members on the forum and Instagram, so I'm just going to roll with it. So let's drop this thing into the car. All right, and mount it up for hopefully the final time, other than perhaps finagling around when it comes to getting those radiator hoses sorted out. But oh my goodness, it is a tight fit, but with just enough clearance where it matters, both on the left-hand side and the right-hand side. It's just sitting a little bit above the AC compressor pulley down there, but I can still barely just slip my fingers in there. So I'm guessing we have about a 5mm or so gap. So that's really not bad at all. But I guess for the ease of putting it, into the car and getting it out, I still have plenty of room to do that. So that's really, really nice. So anyways, that's going to be it for this episode. I'm amazed at how many small jobs have to happen in order to get this done, but I guess that's just how it is when you have custom everything going on in here, especially that radiator. That was a little bit of a challenge, but as far as tools and fabrication is concerned, it really isn't that bad. So hopefully you're able to do this all yourselves when the time comes. Anyways, hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.